Chapter 4, Anger. Anger is the feeling of being irritated, miffed, teed off, irked, annoyed, furious, enraged, burned. People get angry when they have been hurt, and so everyone has angry feelings from time to time. When a person tells you he never gets angry, he's really telling you he doesn't recognize his anger or is concealing it because he's afraid of what it may reveal about him. You don't have to be seething with rage to qualify as being angry. Indeed, most of the anger that people feel is not violent or difficult to control. It is irritation or annoyance, the usual response to everyday disappointments. Anger, like anxiety, is just a category for a wide range of feelings, all of which have in common the fact that they are reactions to hurt or loss. How does anger result from being hurt? Any emotional injury drains your energy by creating a negative feeling that has to be resolved in some way. The natural reaction is to redirect that negative feeling outside you, at whatever caused the pain. This is the most effective way of settling anger, but it's not quite as simple as it seems, because the cause of the hurt is not always clearly identifiable. Here's an example that illustrates this. The anger of a grief reaction. A 10-year-old boy's dog is killed by an automobile. The boy feels great loss. The dog has been his constant companion. The boy can't believe his dog is really dead. It hurts too much even to cry over his pet. The pain of the loss is so great the youngster can't express any of it directly. He's not able to work in school or concentrate on anything important. He sits in his room and stares at the television set without enjoying it. All his energy seems to have been used up trying to contain the hurt. A part of himself that he's identified with his dog no longer exists, and he dearly misses that part. He's angry that the dog has died. But who should he be angry at for the death of his dog? After a few weeks the boy begins to speak with anger about the driver of the car and once even accuses the driver of trying to hit the dog. He begins to dream he saw the car that killed his dog crashing into a wall. After a while he remembers that his dog always chased cars and he wasn't able to break him of the habit. He feels angry at himself for failing as a trainer, and irritated with his parents for not offering to help train the dog. Later he begins to direct his feelings against his dog for not knowing any better than to chase cars. Gradually the boy's anger is released and his energy for other activities slowly returns. He's able to concentrate in school again and get back to living his life as usual. Expressing anger over the hurt that causes it allows an emotional wound to close. In this case the youngster naturally began to seek out objects he could get angry at, first, the driver of the automobile, then the automobile, and then even a little at himself. Much of that anger had the quality of, if only I'd acted right I wouldn't have lost my dog. Next, he shifted the blame from himself to his parents, and finally, much diluted by time, the anger was directed at the dog. Having vented his anger at all possible targets, he finally came to the right one and his wound was allowed to heal. If any loss is to heal in the best and most complete way, the anger it generates needs to be allowed full freedom of expression. The first step in repairing an injury is to make the hurt known by getting angry. The second is to direct that anger toward an appropriate target. Expressing anger is a natural, healthy response and is necessary to keep one's emotions in balance. This isn't to say that anger is a pleasant feeling. There's a great deal of stress involved as one's blood pressure climbs and heart rate accelerates. But if the angry person can release the emotional and physical tension that has built up inside, he will eventually feel better. Trouble comes when the true source of the hurt is unavailable to get angry at, or when doing so causes so much unacceptable pain the anger is blocked and the angry feelings fester inside. Some people feel that it's wrong to be angry and refuse to admit to even the mildest annoyance. Others dislike getting angry because it's unpleasant. Some people mistakenly believe it will just go away if they ignore it, or are afraid that if they get angry they'll lose control, create a scene, embarrass themselves or hurt others. Whatever the reasons people give for not getting angry, they are self-deceiving. You can never justify burying your anger. To hold anger back only adds to the hurt that caused it. The defenses that prevent the anger from flowing naturally outward now channel it inward, directing it against you. Someone always pays for anger. Far better it be the one who caused the pain than the one who received it. When you hold anger in, you only punish yourself. How much anger needs to be expressed to balance a hurt? It varies from person to person. Some can merely mention their hurt to the person who caused it and their anger is over and done with. Others have so much pent-up anger that they go into a rage at getting a wrong number. Of course, it's never possible to have a perfect balance between anger and hurt. That would mean one particular loss could be cancelled by one particular feeling. No matter how angry the young boy got over his dog's death, for example, his hurt could never be completely erased. No amount of anger could bring his dog back. But showing no anger over the loss would have been the same as denying it happened, and in the same process denying his feelings. Allowing the anger to flow cleanses the emotional wound and initiates healing. Some people fear admitting hurt because they don't want to appear weak. Ironically, their unaccepted hurt and unexpressed anger over it undermine them and only make them feel less strong, less able to admit future hurt, setting up a vicious cycle that eventually shuts out reality. Although showing anger is necessary to balance a hurt, it's sometimes difficult to know what's appropriate. For example, how do you express anger appropriately at a loved one who has just died from a long and painful illness? Is it appropriate to complain to the heavens for making the loved one of such fragile substance? Is it appropriate to curse the deceased for his physical shortcomings or his neglect in not seeing his doctors sooner? Such angry feelings, even if justified, are difficult to admit when the person who caused them is dead. You feel guilty getting angry at someone who's already paid the greatest price. Nonetheless, we often are angry at the loved one who has died and left us, however irrational or inappropriate it may be. Then how do we express our anger over such a loss? A recently widowed elderly woman was looking for help for her unrelenting grief. When she talked about her late husband, she complained that her eyes burned. Her husband had been a rather meek and simple man who, although he'd done his best, had just managed to provide her with the basic necessities. She would clench her fists when talking about her exasperation in trying to manage a small apartment in a deteriorating housing project. To be angry at her late husband would only have made her sadness greater by increasing her guilt. Because she did love him and his memory was one of the few things he left her that she valued, getting angry at him was too great a risk. So, safe targets for her anger were chosen from the many government agencies and other people she encountered in her daily life. She got angry at the Veterans Administration for not sending enough money, at the secretary in the health clinic for not being courteous, and at her children for not being attentive. Perhaps these attacks weren't always justified, but in time her anger at her husband for dying was dispersed among several people, none of whom seemed to notice the extra anger coming their way, and in this way her grief began to lighten. This process of releasing anger by directing it outward in an appropriate way is central to the whole issue of hurt and anger. If anger isn't expressed but is defensively held inside, it begins to destroy the person it lives in, eroding everything that feels good in that person. Yet some people seem to be angry all the time and are still irritable and edgy. Why aren't they well-balanced and happy? After all, they're always letting their angry feelings out. Or are they? Just because a person acts angry doesn't mean that he is settling a hurt in a way that allows him to come to grips with it. Chronically angry people often feel shortchanged in life and blame others for their problems. They seldom receive what they think they deserve. They don't realize that few people in life get much of anything without working for it. But to admit this would require that the person accept some of the blame for his own failure. Usually this is too frightening because it opens the floodgates. If I'm at fault for some of my failures, maybe I'm at fault for all of them. This is too depressing and overwhelming to contemplate, more comfortable to guard against any attempt at self-blame by continually directing anger outward, an anger that becomes a defense and indeed a way of life. Any passing slight adds to the reservoir of pain. Anger is continually discharged, scattershot, without ever coming to grips with the original source of the hurt. Confusion, frustration and escalating bitterness result, searching for a target that can't or doesn't want to be located. The direct appropriate expression of anger, on the other hand, is a necessary part of a healthy emotional life. Don't regret having angry feelings. Everyone gets angry when they get hurt. The only people who don't get hurt and therefore angry are those who claim to have no vulnerabilities. And people with no vulnerabilities have no sensitivity. They also can't respond to another's feelings or share, or be intimate, because they have no access to their own feelings. Sometimes when a hurt is relatively slight, a person may bury it rather than express it in anger. This can become a bad habit, because many small silent hurts can add up to produce a big anger. When that happens, no single cause of the pain seems important enough to justify getting as angry as the person now feels. To let out that much anger at any of the little wounds would seem inappropriate, so it's held in. Which is the way to disaster. When angry feelings are allowed to flow naturally to wherever they appropriately lead, what happens? The answer is different, for everyone has his own style and personality, and so each hurt feels different accordingly. But basically, once the matter is confronted openly, and honestly, the anger, once out, is out. The slate is clear again. Difficulties occur when people try to modify their natural feelings to make them more acceptable to others. In so doing, they vent only part of the anger and still feel trapped. Nothing adds to a person's sense of frustration as much as trapped anger. The person who truly understands his feelings doesn't sit and brood in silence over pain, constructing angry fantasies of retaliation. Instead, he openly confronts the person who hurt him and as quickly as possible tells him exactly what he thinks of the situation with as little fanfare or exaggeration as possible. He does not rub the other person's nose in his misdeed, for example, nor does he play the role of the injured party who now has a right not merely to retaliate, but also to humiliate. People who act out their fantasies of revenge don't merely want to get even, but to destroy. Admitting that you feel this angry is a good first step toward finding the proper perspective. Many people are reluctant to get angry because their fantasies are so violent they frighten and confuse them. They worry they'd really go overboard if they let loose and prove to the world that they are the monsters. They don't realize that their fantasies are the result of the holding back itself. So they do nothing. Both these alternatives, overreacting and not reacting at all, are unhealthy. There are better ways of releasing anger. Here are some points to remember. When someone has hurt you, tell them so directly and openly. You hurt me, and also tell them exactly why. Do this in private. Don't unnecessarily set them on the defensive. It will only make them feel like retaliating rather than listening. Be firm as you need to be to get your point across, but try not to be punitive. If the person denies he hurt you, point out the facts again and say you know what you feel. If the other person tells you you are too sensitive, that he was just kidding, point out that people vary in their sensitivity. One man's kidding is another man's pain. Tell him you want to make him aware of your sensitivities so that he can take them into consideration in the future. If you feel the other person hurt you on purpose, say so. When people hurt others intentionally, they often do so out of anger. If this is the case, ask that he be more direct in expressing his anger next time, telling you the problem without causing you unnecessary hurt. When someone hurts you like this, it's up to you to act in control. The other person is already acting childish. Retaliating seldom solves the problem and often obscures the point that both parties are trying to make. It causes guilt, pushes people apart, and wastes time and energy. Expressing anger properly is healthy and restoring, but there are many people who can't seem to handle anger at all. Feeling angry makes them feel badly about themselves, and so they keep their feelings bottled up. People fear getting angry for different reasons, depending, to some degree, on their background and past experiences. Let's go back to the 3 personality types: dependent people, controlling people, and esteem-seeking people. Dependent people are afraid that being angry will prove they are unlovable. They're afraid that expressing their anger will turn away the people they need for nurturing and support. Many of these people had difficulty in being nurtured as children, and grew up with a feeding of insecurity over their own worth as a person. Such people have learned to swallow most of their anger and often feel trapped, helpless, and empty. When they do get angry, they're often inappropriate in their choice of target and out of control. Their rage may be directed at a safe target, such as a helpless child, just like themselves. Many child beaters are in this category. People who felt unloved in childhood almost never feel comfortable getting angry at someone they love. Instead, they may act helpless or beaten as a way of getting to others. It's as if they were saying, "See, look what you're making me do to myself." Their approach almost never works. They only succeed in pushing the people they need farther away from them. Dependent people go through life struggling angrily and half-heartedly for their independence. They may feel someone is holding them back, not giving them what they're entitled to. Their anger is very much like a child's who feels mistreated and wants to get even but doesn't know how. Because their goals tend to be so dependent on, they don't make an effort for themselves where it counts. Their anger is turned in on themselves, and their energy is quickly dissipated. As for the controlling people, they tend to equate showing anger with losing control. They try to ward off hurts and anger by elaborate mental manipulations. But feelings simply can't be as controlled as they'd like. Feelings want to be expressed. Trying to control them merely reshapes the way they may appear, but it doesn't change the feeling itself or diminish its impact. People who are especially interested in control seem always to be looking for excuses for their feelings. They intellectualize, rationalize, project, isolate, and otherwise confuse the real issues. They hardly ever see anything in a simple or uncomplicated way. For a controlling person to say, "You hurt me and I am angry with you," is very difficult. To be vulnerable, for them, is to be out of control. Anger is a powerful feeling, and to channel it away from emotional expression by intellectual means requires much energy, consuming fantasy and thought. These in turn remove you so far from actual events and feelings that you often forget what the hurt was about. The first step in settling anger, the admission of the hurt, becomes the first stumbling block that controlling people need to overcome. It's doubly hard for them because, although they can easily talk about their feelings in words, the words don't translate into emotions. Not only do they have a difficult time expressing anger, they also find it exceedingly painful to accept proper responsibility for hurting another person. If you get angry at a controlling person for hurting you, you may find it an especially unrewarding experience. When you make your point, the controlling person will probably give you a detailed explanation to prove his actions were out of the best intentions. The fault is yours. The hurt inflicted on you wasn't really a hurt at all, but your own shortcoming finally brought to life by his generous behavior that, of course, was for your own good. Confused? you're supposed to be. Controlling people can be difficult to deal with because they are simply so intellectually involved and so far removed from their feelings that they aren't really honest. Worse than that, they have a limited ability to accept their dishonesty and so give defensive excuses when cornered. They see themselves as people who must be perfect and use their formidable defenses to lure you away from any meaningful discussion of their feelings, their anger, or their weak points. When these people do show anger, it's extraordinarily unpleasant. One has the feeling of being in the same room with a mad tyrant. They're unable to say simply, "You hurt me." Their anger is so tied up in intellectualized defenses that it's never really free to be expressed simply and directly. Instead, they lash out in torrents of rage. Such people need to learn to express their anger a little at a time and, most of all, come to realize that they can be angry without losing control, without going to pieces. People most worried about esteem and superficial appearances often suppress their anger by hiding behind an act of some kind. By exaggerating their reactions, they deny their real feelings. For example, they may act wildly, hysterically angry, but when asked about it won't admit anything is really wrong. "I was only pretending," they will say. Such people would rather play the role of an angry person than admit to their real feelings of anger. To reveal their own feelings forthrightly is to risk being judged. Instead of risking the loss of your respect or admiration, they disguise their anger. Their feelings often manifest themselves as physical complaints. Everyone is familiar, for example, with headaches caused by held in anger. "I've got one of my sick headaches," goes the refrain, instead of, "I'd like to kick your teeth in," which may be closer to the anger felt. By masking real feelings, these physical symptoms spare the person from being judged and rejected for being angry. Another way these people handle anger is to split off any angry outbursts from themselves as if it didn't belong to them at all. Later they may conveniently forget the outburst and refuse to accept the anger as their own. The problem with managing anger this way is that it uses up so much energy, wears you out, and the anger is never really directed at those who caused it. The people who are to blame aren't even put on notice that they've been hurtful. The injured person hasn't directly defended or expressed himself, and so there's no relief from the cycle of hurt and anger. These three personality types as they relate to the feeling of anger have been discussed in some detail because each of us is our own unique mixture of all three. Everyone shares some defenses in common with all three types, but in widely varying degree. Some of us have large reservoirs of anger that require all our energy to handle. Such a backlog of unresolved feelings needs to be decreased to levels where we begin to have energy available for investing in the world outside. It's difficult to react to the world in a fairly easy, outgoing manner if you continually feel anxious that you're going to lose control and blow up. When you're filled with negative feelings, you may be ready to do battle at the drop of a hat, not to mention a word or a look. Some days are like that for everyone, of course. There are days when something goes wrong that's hard to identify, and so we go through the day being irritable and snippy, looking for people to get into arguments with and being generally unpleasant. But to live one's whole life this way is intolerable. In the traditional forms of psychotherapy, people with such long-standing painful feelings are led back into their pasts to uncover the source of the original pain and then come to terms with it. The theory is that the person, now older and wiser and having the perspective of many years' growth and much suffering, will be able to view the old pain with a new distance and accuracy and so be better able to put away his old defensive devices for dealing with that pain. This method doesn't always work so simply and neatly in practice. Just to grow up is to gain a new perspective on past hurts, successes, loves and hates so we can see the present more in keeping with what is and less with what was. The best way to change one's perspective on the past is to deal honestly with the feelings of the present and to resolve those feelings as completely as possible as they occur. If you're angry, show it. Don't take refuge in a headache. Don't pretend you're above such feelings. And don't try to ignore them and bury them in the past. Every therapeutic process takes place in the present, whether or not the events being discussed are from the present or the past. What you should ultimately learn in any form of therapy is a better way of discharging feelings so that the minimal residue remains from emotional encounters and you are free to interact without emotional legacies. The way to change your attitude toward the past is to become as honest as possible in the present. Being totally honest is the best way to live in any case. Existing at levels of lesser honesty takes up too much energy and always relies on defenses. You can't live your best life telling lies, especially to yourself. Becoming totally honest is the first step to becoming free. Expressing your feelings openly is the second. Other people may feel you're overdoing it the first time you express strong feelings such as anger openly. Just remember that most people avoid making any kind of disturbance. Don't make waves, we're told, and your anger, even if it's mild, will appear unusual. Some people will be startled or upset by your honesty. That's too bad. You just try to speak out with the truth as you see it. Most people worth getting angry at, people you care about, will accept or at least tolerate your new attitude. Those who won't don't respect your right to be a person. It may take some months for you to feel natural expressing your feelings, especially anger. When you first begin to be open, you may feel your emotions build and rush to the surface, almost sweeping you away with them. It's tempting to close down and rein them in again. Be brave. Don't hold back. Let them out. The process of learning to express feelings is painful. It requires your determination. Stick with it. It will pay off as trapped feelings of hurt and anger from the past come out and escape piggyback on their counterpart feelings of the present. Now you'll no longer feel as if you must always be on guard to hold back forbidden feelings. As you become more accustomed to being open, you'll be amazed at how little time and energy it takes to keep current with your feelings. Saying, "You hurt me," will literally become a matter of course. People who are dishonest will find it more difficult to deal with you and will keep their distance, for which you can be grateful. Life will be fuller and richer because there will be more of you available for the people and things you love in the present. In time something else important will happen. The feelings you now hold in aren't your feelings from the long-forgotten past of early childhood, but the feelings of present, everyday life. The angers of this week, yesterday, this morning are now the culprits. Not large hurts, but little events insult and hurt you every day. It's your faulty pattern of dealing with feelings on a day-to-day basis that causes most of the difficulty in your life, and it can be recognized and adjusted without hauling out all the heavy baggage of the past. The process of growth and becoming is continuous. If we're open to it, it can offer new opportunities to find ourselves and reshape the course of our lives. Just as adolescence offers new opportunities to re-examine the issues of independence, control, esteem and identity, the remaining years of our lives present chances to redefine ourselves, to seek our freedom and learn to be ourselves without apology. Again, the secret to success in this continuum of growth is to be honest with your feelings at all times. Every time you're dishonest, you create a problem, reinforce a negative energy, or bolster an old defensive system which then distorts reality and interferes with your ability to cope with the world. If you're hurt and don't experience the expected anger, ask yourself why not. Where has the anger gone? Are you hiding it? Are you pretending it doesn't bother you? Why shouldn't you feel angry when you're hurt? Are you afraid of appearing vulnerable in front of a particular person? When you're afraid of opening up in front of a particular person, but have been able to do so with others, it may mean you don't really trust that person. You're afraid that exposing yourself to him would be a risk. He might hurt you further or retaliate. If your natural expression of a feeling is blocked by the presence of another person, that person is keeping you from being honest and free. The inhibitions you feel may actually be his defenses, working to shut you off. Pointing out how his presence inhibits you and makes it difficult for you to be your best and most honest self is your best weapon and most valuable insight. Avoiding people who enhance or encourage your dishonesty is probably a good idea. It's hard enough being with the demanding and unappreciative employer who treats employees like objects, making them feel insignificant, constantly hurting them and using his authority to intimidate them. The employees feel irritable and defensive and tend to perceive the boss negatively even when he has no negative intention. Expressing anger in a situation like this carries its complications, not the least of which is losing your job. If you have an employer like this, you have a choice. You can learn to accept his negative ways without becoming personally involved, or you can change jobs. But of course that's not always as easy as it sounds. Many people feel trapped in a job out of fear of change or because they don't want to lose their seniority. The protective structure provided by seniority and unions is remarkably analogous to our psychological defensive systems. Originally they were constructed to keep us from being vulnerable and to protect us from possible hurt. Then we became dependent on them and found it hard to function without them. We have a way of recreating in our immediate environment the same problems and patterns that imprison us in our own minds. It's true that the way our present society is constructed, even when we become free of our own defenses, our openness tends to bring us into some conflict with the defenses and controlling patterns of the world we're trying to survive in. Still, there's always room for increasing the openness and access to your own feelings and to the feelings of others. That's the real world, the one most accessible, most rewarding and over which you can assert the maximum healthy control for your own good. Often the people we become angry at are people without faces or names, people who pass by so quickly we hardly notice them, the bus driver who slams the door in our face, the police officer with a chip on his shoulder, the nasty waitress, the irritable ticket taker, the obnoxious cab driver, the authoritative lawyer, the pompous physician. All hurt us in ways that make us angry, but we need the services and assistance of these people and are forced to endure their negative manner and hostile attitudes. But how to deal with anger created by people like this? The physician will often become defensive and arrogant when confronted. The lawyer will find some way of getting back at you that you will undoubtedly pay dearly for. In the best of worlds it should be possible simply to tell the person he has hurt you. But many of these people don't really care. What then? To take affront at these episodes and make them a personal issue is the worst thing you can do. You'll end up wasting a great deal of energy and gain very little. Still, even in these situations the moment may come when you can usefully give your opinion of their behavior straightforwardly and honestly. Tell the cab driver when you pay him that you felt he was rude and therefore you're not tipping him. Tell the person who's surly to you, you have a chip on your shoulder, and I'm not going to knock it off. Again, the important thing is to let it be their problem, not yours. Be thankful that your own feelings are settled in ways that leave you human. Aren't you glad you aren't the bus driver, being so angry all the time? If someone willfully hurts you, it's their problem, but to let them gain control over your feelings and make you angry for the entire day, that's your problem. The best way of dealing with such people is to be in tune with your own feelings. If you are, these people can't easily push you over into an angry mood. If your anger starts to build up, here are some ways of letting it out. Imagine the person who has offended you dressed in ridiculous disguises, such as red tights and leathers. Or imagine him at a state banquet, nude and eating with his fingers. A ridiculous fantasy helps dissipate anger nicely and will put a smile on your face that will drive the other person absolutely crazy. Besides, the other person is already wearing a ridiculous disguise by being an angry person. Your fantasy will help you put that into perspective. There are other ways of letting anger out. Write a furious letter, but don't mail it. Keep it and reread it in a month. You can telephone the offending person, keeping the button down, and let all your anger out. Anything that will put you in imaginary contact and release your feelings will work very nicely. Even if you feel silly, try it. You'll be amazed at how much better you feel. Pounding a pillow for 10 minutes also provides tremendous release for some people. So does screaming. But be careful. These devices can become ends in themselves and should only be used as a substitute for the real thing when the actual person is unavailable or you haven't yet worked up the courage and ability to confront him directly. Also take time to recognize the physical ways you feel anger. Everyone has a special different place for feeling anger. Some people get a tight feeling in the neck, others get a burning sensation. Think about where you feel anger and take notice of it. It's your signal to do something to let that anger out. Letting anger out as you feel it makes all the difference in the world.